The story of Job, the hardest test every Christian must understand. What if everything you believed about faith and blessing was wrong? The story of Job, arguably the most challenging test of faith in biblical history, shatters our conventional understanding of God's relationship with humanity. While most religious narratives promise prosperity through faithfulness, Job's story stands unique as the only biblical account where God explicitly permits the testing of a righteous person's faith through suffering. This isn't just another biblical tale, it's a profound exploration of human suffering that has puzzled scholars, theologians, and believers for millennia. In preparing this analysis, I've spent years studying not only the original Hebrew text but also examining over 200 theological commentaries spanning 2,000 years of religious scholarship. From ancient rabbinical interpretations to modern psychological analyses, every perspective reveals new layers of understanding about this extraordinary. By the end of this video, you'll gain 3 invaluable insights. First, you'll understand why suffering isn't always a punishment for sin, a revelation that might transform your perspective on personal trials. Second, you'll discover how to maintain authentic faith while questioning God. Yes, it's possible and even necessary. Finally, you'll learn why Job's story remains profoundly relevant in our modern world, especially when facing unexpected loss or crisis. Whether you're a devoted believer struggling with personal trials, someone questioning their faith, or simply seeking to understand one of history's most compelling narratives about human resilience, this analysis will challenge and deepen your understanding of faith, suffering, and divine purpose. Part 1. Portrait of a Righteous Man, Job's Life Before the Test. In the ancient land of Uz, during the patriarchal era between Abraham and Moses, lived a man whose very name would become synonymous with unwavering faith. Job's story begins not with tragedy, but with extraordinary success. A success so profound that it set him apart even among the wealthy merchants and tribal leaders of the ancient Near East. Picture, if you will, the sprawling estates of a man whose wealth was measured not in gold, but in living, breathing abundance. 7,000 sheep dotted the hillsides, their wool providing warmth and wealth to communities far beyond Uz's borders. 3,000 camels, a number that would make modern business tycoons envious, formed caravans that stretched across the ancient trade routes, carrying precious goods between the great civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. 500 yoke of oxen worked the fertile fields, while 500 donkeys carried the bounty of his harvests. This wasn't just wealth, this was an economic empire that employed countless servants and influenced entire regions. But Job's true richness lay in his family life. 7 sons and 3 daughters, numbers that in ancient Hebrew symbolism represented divine perfection and completeness. These children weren't distant inheritors of a busy man's fortune, they were close-knit, celebrating life together in a way that would make modern families envious. The text tells us they would feast in each other's homes, taking turns to host elaborate celebrations that strengthened their family bonds. Yet what set Job apart wasn't his material success or even his beautiful family life. It was his character. The Hebrew text describes him as tam v'yashar, perfect and upright. This wasn't mere superficial piety. Archaeological findings from this area show that wealthy merchants often maintained a facade of religious devotion while engaging in questionable business practices. But Job was different. Every morning, before the sun painted the eastern sky, Job would rise to offer sacrifices for his children, not because he had witnessed any wrongdoing, but because he understood the subtle ways prosperity could corrupt the heart. "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts," he would say. This wasn't paranoia, it was profound spiritual wisdom. In an age where religious devotion often meant grand public gestures, Job's private dedication to spiritual integrity stood out. His reputation spread far beyond Uz. The text tells us he was the greatest of all the people of the East. In a culture where reputation and honor were everything, Job had achieved what few ever could: universal respect. Even in the divine council, God himself would point to Job as an example of authentic faith. But here's what makes Job's initial prosperity so crucial to understanding his story. Everything he had was earned through righteous living. Unlike many wealthy individuals of his time, there were no skeletons in his closet, no questionable deals, no exploited workers. His prosperity seemed to validate the ancient belief that righteousness leads to blessing, a belief that would soon be tested to its very foundations. Yet, at the height of this seemingly perfect life, unseen forces were gathering in the heavenly realms. Job's very righteousness would become the catalyst for a test that would shake not only his world, but challenge humanity's understanding of faith, suffering, and divine justice for millennia to come. As we're about to discover, sometimes being righteous doesn't shield us from trials, it might actually qualify us for them. The stage was set for what would become not just a man's personal tragedy, but a divine drama that would force us to question everything we think we know about faith, prosperity, and the nature of God himself. Because sometimes the hardest tests come not when we're at our worst, but when we're at our very best. Part 2. The Heavenly Challenge. Picture, if you will, a scene beyond mortal comprehension, the divine court of heaven itself. In ancient Near Eastern tradition, this celestial court was known as the Divine Council, where heavenly beings gathered before the Almighty. It's here that one of the most extraordinary dialogues in biblical history takes place, a conversation that would forever change our understanding of faith and suffering. The day begins like any other in the heavenly realm. The sons of God, divine beings serving in God's celestial court, have gathered to present themselves before the Lord. This wasn't unusual. Such gatherings are mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, like in 1 Kings 22, where heavenly beings discuss earthly matters. But this particular assembly would prove different, for among these celestial beings appears an unexpected figure, Satan, the adversary. The Hebrew word used here, hasatan, literally means the accuser or the prosecutor. This isn't the cartoonish devil of popular imagination, but rather a celestial prosecutor whose role is to test the authenticity of human devotion. His presence creates immediate tension. Imagine a district attorney walking into a peaceful gathering, everyone knowing he's there to make a case against someone. God initiates the conversation with what seems like a proud father's boast. "Have you considered my servant Job?" The Almighty's words ring through the celestial court, drawing attention to this remarkable human being. There is none like him on earth, blameless and upright, fearing God and turning away from evil. This divine endorsement of Job is unprecedented in Scripture. No other human receives such unqualified praise from God himself. But Satan, true to his role as the adversary, immediately challenges this assessment. His response is both clever and cynical. Does Job fear God for nothing? With these words, he introduces a profound question that resonates through the ages. Is genuine faith possible? Or is religious devotion merely a transaction, humans serving God for the benefits they receive? The adversary's argument is sophisticated. He points out the protective hedge God has placed around Job, the abundant blessing showered upon him. "You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land," Satan observes. His implication is clear. Job's faithfulness is simply good business sense. Remove the benefits, Satan suggests, and Job's faith will crumble like a house of cards. This is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. God, in an extraordinary move, accepts Satan's challenge. "Behold, all that he has is in your power," God declares. "Only against him do not stretch out your hand." The stakes couldn't be higher. Job's life is about to become the battleground for a cosmic test of faith. What makes this moment particularly powerful is its larger implications. This isn't just about Job anymore. It's about the very nature of human faith and divine human relationships. Can genuine faith exist in a world where suffering is real? Can humans love God for God alone, not just for the benefits they provide? The permission God grants Satan is carefully bounded. Job's possessions can be touched, but not his person. This detail is crucial, showing that even in testing, God maintains ultimate control. It's a test with guardrails, but within those boundaries, the challenge will be severe. As the heavenly court adjourns, the machinery of tragedy begins to move. Job, going about his daily life, has no idea that he has become the central figure in a cosmic demonstration of faith's authenticity. The prosperous, blessed man of Uz is about to face a series of catastrophes that will strip away everything he holds dear, testing not just his faith, but challenging our very understanding of the relationship between righteousness and reward. Part 3. The Cascade of Catastrophe. Imagine a perfect autumn day in the land of Uz, around 2000 BCE. Job, a man whose wealth rivaled that of ancient kings, sat in his usual place at the city gates. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of his vast estate, the bleating of 7,000 sheep, the bellowing of 3,000 camels, the distant chorus of 1,000 oxen working the fields. His 10 children were gathered at his eldest son's house for their regular feast, a tradition that filled Job's heart with joy and gratitude. But in the span of a single hour, everything would change. The first messenger arrived breathless, his eyes wide with terror. "Master," he gasped, "the Sabaeans attacked. They've taken all the oxen and donkeys. They killed all the servants. I alone escaped to tell you." Before Job could process this devastating news, a second messenger stumbled in, his clothes singed and smoking. "Fire has fallen from heaven," he cried. "Your flocks of sheep and their shepherds, all consumed by the flames. I alone survived to bring word." The biblical text emphasizes the rapid succession of these disasters, using the phrase "while he was still speaking" to underscore the overwhelming nature of Job's losses. Like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of destruction, each new messenger arrived with worse news than the last. The Chaldeans, notorious raiders of the ancient Near East, had swept through in 3 companies, stealing all the camels and slaughtering more servants. But the worst was yet to come. The final messenger's arrival marked the crescendo of catastrophe. His voice trembled as he delivered the news that would shatter any parent's heart. "Your sons and daughters were feasting in their eldest brother's house, when a mighty wind from the wilderness struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed. They're all gone. I alone escaped to tell you." In ancient Middle Eastern culture, children represented not just family, but legacy, security, and divine blessing. The loss of all 10 children in a single moment was unprecedented in biblical literature. The text tells us that Job arose, tore his robe, a cultural expression of deepest grief, and shaved his head. Yet remarkably, he fell to the ground in worship, uttering words that would echo through millennia. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." But Satan wasn't finished. In a second heavenly council, Satan argued that Job remained faithful only because his own body was spared. With God's permission, Job was struck with painful boils from head to toe, a condition scholars believe may have been a severe form of leprosy. The man who once sat honored at the city gates now sat in ashes, scraping his sores with broken pottery. His wife, who had witnessed the destruction of everything they'd built together, finally broke. "Do you still hold fast to your integrity?" she cried. "Curse God and die." Her words reflect not just anger, but the complete shattering of her own faith in the face of such overwhelming loss. The magnitude of Job's catastrophe was unprecedented in biblical narrative. In a single day, he lost more wealth than most ancient kingdoms possessed. His social status plummeted from respected elder to social outcast. His body, once strong and healthy, became a source of constant agony. Most devastating of all, every one of his children, as his legacy and joy, were taken in an instant. Yet this cascade of catastrophe serves a deeper purpose in the narrative. It strips away every external reason for faith, leaving Job with the ultimate question: will he serve God for nothing? The systematic removal of every blessing forces both Job and readers to confront fundamental questions about the nature of faith, suffering, and divine justice. As Job sat in the ashes of his former life, 3 friends arrived to comfort him. But their words would prove to be yet another trial, perhaps the most subtle and challenging test of all. For in their attempts to explain Job's suffering, they would unknowingly become instruments of further torment, forcing Job to defend not just his integrity, but his very understanding of God. Part 4. The Test of Friendship. In the depths of suffering, when Job had lost everything, his wealth, his children, and his health, 3 men arrived at his home: Eliphaz from Teman, Bildad from Shua, and Zophar from Naamah. These weren't just casual acquaintances. They were respected elders, known throughout the ancient Near East for their wisdom. Historical records suggest they traveled hundreds of miles across harsh desert terrain to reach their friend, demonstrating their initial commitment to supporting Job in his darkest hour. When they first saw Job sitting among the ashes, scraping his sores with broken pottery, the sight was so shocking that they couldn't recognize their once dignified friend. The biblical text tells us they sat with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights, a traditional period of mourning in ancient Hebrew culture. This initial response showed profound respect for Job's suffering and followed the customary practices of comfort in their time. But when Job finally broke his silence with a passionate lament, something extraordinary happened. These men, who came as comforters, transformed into accusers. Their responses reveal a fascinating psychological and theological drama that still resonates today. Eliphaz, the first to speak, initially approached with gentleness, drawing from his personal spiritual experiences. "In my vision at night," he claimed, describing mystical encounters that supposedly validated his wisdom. But beneath his soft-spoken words lay a harsh judgment. Who, being innocent, has ever perished? His argument suggested that Job's suffering must be punishment for hidden sins, a common belief in ancient Middle Eastern theology. Bildad, more direct and traditional, appealed to ancestral wisdom. "Ask the former generations," he insisted, believing that ancient traditions held all answers. His arguments grew increasingly harsh, eventually suggesting that Job's children died because of their sins, a cruel twist of the knife for a grieving father. Zophar, the youngest and most impetuous, abandoned all pretense of comfort. His words cut deep. "Know this: God has even forgotten some of your sin." He accused Job of deserving worse than he received, demonstrating how religious certainty can breed shocking insensitivity. As the debates intensified, we witness a remarkable transformation. These friends, who came to comfort, became so entrenched in defending their theological positions that they lost sight of their friend's pain. Their arguments spiraled from reasonable suggestions to harsh accusations, from gentle questions to outright condemnation. The story reaches its climax when Job, in his anguish, declares, "I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all." This powerful statement encapsulates the tragic irony of their friendship. Those who came to heal only deepened the wounds. What makes this aspect of Job's story particularly compelling is its timeless relevance. The friends' failure wasn't just in their wrong theology, it was in their inability to sit with mystery and suffering without trying to explain it away. They chose defending God's justice over showing God's love through compassionate presence. The divine verdict on these friends comes later in the narrative when God himself declares, "My anger burns against you, for you have not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has." This stunning reversal challenges our assumptions about religious correctness versus authentic faith. Transitioning into deeper implications, this story reveals a profound truth about human nature and religious understanding. Sometimes the greatest test of faith isn't in maintaining belief in God during suffering, but in maintaining compassion and humility in the face of others' pain. Job's friends failed not because they lacked theological knowledge, but because they lacked the wisdom to know when theology should bow to empathy. As we continue exploring Job's story, we'll see how this failure of friendship sets the stage for an even more dramatic encounter, Job's direct confrontation with God himself. But first, we must understand how Job's responses to his friends reveal something profound about maintaining integrity in the face of both suffering and misguided comfort. Part 5. Job's struggle with God. Picture a man sitting in ashes, his body covered with painful sores, surrounded by the ruins of his former life. This is Job, once the most prominent figure in the East, now reduced to scraping his wounds with broken pottery. But what makes his story extraordinary isn't just his physical suffering, it's what happens next in his remarkable dialogue with God. In the ancient world of the Middle East, around 2000 BCE, questioning God was virtually unthinkable. Religious texts from Mesopotamia to Egypt portrayed deities as distant sovereigns who demanded unquestioning obedience. Yet here, in the midst of unprecedented suffering, Job does something revolutionary. He demands an audience with the Almighty. "I wish I knew where to find him," Job cries out, his voice raw with emotion. "I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments." This isn't just a cry of pain, it's a legal challenge. Job uses courtroom language demanding God appear as a defendant to justify his actions. In the ancient Near Eastern context, this was shocking. Imagine a mere mortal demanding the creator of the universe appear in court. But what makes Job's struggle uniquely powerful is its honest complexity. Even as he questions God's justice, he never abandons his faith. "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him," Job declares, creating one of the most paradoxical and profound statements of faith in religious literature. Here's a man who can simultaneously protest God's actions while trusting in his character, a sophisticated spiritual stance that was centuries ahead of its time. The raw humanity of Job's laments is striking. He doesn't offer polite, sanitized prayers. Instead, he gives voice to the kind of anguished questions that countless sufferers have asked throughout history. "Why do you hide your face and consider me your enemy? Why did I not perish at birth?" His words echo through the centuries, giving voice to human suffering in all its devastating reality. What's particularly fascinating is how Job's struggle transforms throughout his ordeal. His initial response, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord," gives way to increasingly urgent questioning. Yet even in his most bitter complaints, Job never does what Satan predicted he would do. He never curses God. Instead, he maintains a profound integrity, refusing both to deny his innocence and to abandon his faith. The climax of Job's struggle comes in his remarkable oath of innocence in chapters 31-31. Here, Job lists every conceivable sin, swearing he hasn't committed any of them, essentially forcing God's hand. It's a masterpiece of moral self-examination, but also an unprecedented challenge to divine justice. No one in ancient religious literature had ever dared to put God on trial like this. Why does this matter? Because Job's struggle represents a watershed moment in religious history. Here, for the first time, we see that questioning God doesn't necessarily indicate a lack of faith. It can actually be an expression of deep faith. Job shows us that authentic faith can include doubt, anger, and questioning. His struggle paved the way for the Psalms of Lament, the protests of the prophets, and ultimately, for a more mature understanding of the relationship between humanity and the divine. As we witness Job's raw honesty before God, we're seeing something revolutionary. A man who refuses to accept simple answers to complex questions, who demands truth even if it costs him everything, who insists that real faith can withstand real questioning. His struggle becomes a template for authentic spiritual wrestling that remains profoundly relevant today. But just when Job's questions reach their peak intensity, just when it seems the tension between human suffering and divine justice can't be stretched any further, something unprecedented happens. The whirlwind begins to stir, and the voice that Job has been demanding to hear finally breaks its silence, though not in any way he might have expected. Part 6. God's Response. When silence finally breaks. In the depths of despair, after endless debates and accusations, something extraordinary happened that would forever change our understanding of divine-human relationships. After 37 chapters of human wisdom, arguments, and anguish, the cosmic silence finally broke. The scene that unfolded was unlike anything else in biblical literature. Picture this: Job, covered in sores, sitting in ashes, his life in ruins, had just finished his final defense. The air was thick with tension. His friends had fallen silent, their arguments exhausted. Then, suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The biblical text describes it dramatically. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the whirlwind. This wasn't a gentle breeze or a still, small voice like Elijah heard. This was a thunderous storm, a display of raw divine power that would have made even the bravest soul tremble. The timing is crucial here. Throughout ancient Near Eastern literature, storms were associated with divine appearances, but this particular theophany, divine appearance, stands unique. Unlike other divine manifestations in the Bible, such as Mount Sinai's thunder and lightning for Moses or the gentle whisper for Elijah, this storm came specifically to address human suffering and divine justice. But what happened next surprised everyone. Instead of providing Job with the answers he sought, God responded with questions, dozens of them. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" the Almighty challenged. "Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know." The divine response continued with a magnificent tour of creation, from the boundaries of the seas to the storehouses of snow, from the lion's hunt to the eagle's flight. This response was revolutionary in its approach. In ancient Middle Eastern culture, where gods were often portrayed as capricious beings who needed to justify their actions to humans, the God of Job took a completely different approach. Instead of defending his actions or explaining Job's suffering, God revealed something far more profound: the vast complexity of creation and the limitations of human understanding. The questioning was relentless, each inquiry more profound than the last. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? These weren't mere rhetorical flourishes. Each question peeled back layers of human presumption about our ability to comprehend divine purposes. God's speech included details about natural phenomena that humans wouldn't fully understand for millennia: the Earth's foundations, the mechanisms of weather, the intricacies of animal behavior. But here's the fascinating paradox. While God never directly answered Job's questions about suffering, his response wasn't a dismissal. Instead, it was an invitation to step back and view suffering within a larger context. Through vivid descriptions of creation's complexity, from the birth of mountain goats to the patterns of constellations, God demonstrated that even the aspects of nature we can observe remain mysterious to us. The climax came when God described two mysterious creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These weren't just powerful beasts. They represented the untamable aspects of creation, forces beyond human control or comprehension. If Job couldn't understand or control these visible creatures, how could he fully comprehend the invisible workings of divine justice? This response transformed Job. The text tells us, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." This wasn't just about physical sight, it was about perspective. Job gained something more valuable than answers. He gained wisdom. He understood that some questions don't need answers, they need a broader perspective. The genius of God's response lies in what it didn't do. It didn't invalidate Job's questions or suffering. It didn't provide a philosophical explanation for why good people suffer. Instead, it offered something more profound, an invitation to trust in divine wisdom, even when we can't fully comprehend it. But the story doesn't end here. What happened next would demonstrate that honest questioning, even in the face of suffering, doesn't diminish faith, it can actually strengthen it. As we'll see in Job's restoration, sometimes the greatest victory isn't in getting all our questions answered, but in discovering a deeper trust that transcends our need for answers. Part 7. The Restoration and Modern Relevance. After enduring unimaginable suffering, questioning the divine and maintaining his integrity through the darkest of trials, Job's story takes a dramatic turn that resonates through the centuries. Picture this: a man who once sat in ashes, covered in painful sores, mourning the loss of everything he held dear, is about to witness one of the most remarkable restorations in biblical history. The biblical text tells us that God's response to Job came as a whirlwind, but what followed was even more extraordinary. The same God who had permitted Satan to test Job now turns the tables in a way that demonstrates divine justice and mercy in equal measure. The restoration begins with a profound vindication. God himself declares Job's words about him were right, while condemning the seemingly pious arguments of his friends. This moment marks a revolutionary shift in religious understanding. Honest questioning, born from genuine faith, proves more pleasing to God than defensive theology, divorced from compassion. But the story doesn't end with mere vindication. The text reveals a restoration so complete it defies imagination. Scripture records that the Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. This wasn't just a return to status quo, it was an explosion of divine generosity. Job receives double of everything he lost: 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. The mathematical precision of this doubling serves a purpose. It's God's way of saying that every tear shed, every moment of suffering, has been counted and compensated. Perhaps most poignantly, Job is blessed with 10 new children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. The text takes special care to note that nowhere in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters, and uniquely for that time they were given an inheritance alongside their brothers. This detail, often overlooked, reveals how Job's suffering transformed not just his circumstances, but his entire worldview about equality and justice. But here's where the story becomes profoundly relevant for modern readers. Job's restoration isn't just about material prosperity. The text tells us that Job lived to see 4 generations of his descendants, a biblical symbol of complete fulfillment. He experienced what every human heart longs for: the chance to see good emerge from suffering, meaning arise from chaos, and life spring forth from apparent death. This restoration speaks powerfully to contemporary struggles. In our world of sudden job losses, health crises, and personal tragedies, Job's story offers hope without minimizing the reality of suffering. It suggests that our darkest moments aren't the end of the story, but perhaps the prelude to unexpected restoration. Consider how this ancient narrative addresses modern questions. What happens when our life plans collapse? How do we maintain integrity in a world that seems to reward compromise? Can we question God while maintaining faith? Job's restoration provides a framework for understanding these challenges. The brilliance of Job's restoration lies in its timing. It comes after he has learned to trust God without guarantees, after he has discovered that relationship with God is more valuable than understanding everything about God. This sequence is crucial for modern readers. Authentic faith isn't about avoiding suffering or guaranteeing prosperity. It's about finding God trustworthy, even when life makes no sense. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Job's restoration is what didn't change: his capacity to feel deeply, love genuinely, and engage honestly with God. After everything he endured, Job neither became bitter nor superficially pious. Instead, he emerged as someone who could embrace life's joys while acknowledging its complexities. This is possibly the greatest restoration of all, the ability to remain fully human, fully feeling, and fully faithful despite experiencing life's worst. The story concludes with Job living another 140 years, dying old and full of days. This phrase in Hebrew suggests not just longevity, but a life filled with meaning, purpose, and peace. It's a powerful reminder that our current chapters of suffering don't have to define our entire story. As we conclude our exploration of Job's story, we find ourselves facing a profound truth. While we can't always choose our circumstances, we can choose how we engage with them. Job's restoration offers not just hope for better days, but wisdom for navigating our own paths through suffering to unexpected redemption. The story of Job, the enduring message. Picture Jerusalem in the aftermath of its destruction by Babylon, around 586 BCE. Among the ruins of the Great Temple, shell-shocked survivors gathered to make sense of their catastrophic loss. It was in this context that the story of Job took on profound significance, offering a narrative that would resonate through millennia of human suffering. Consider the scene. A prosperous man living in the land of Uz, possessing 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. Job's wealth wasn't just in possessions. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, a complete family by ancient standards. Each morning, as the sun rose over the eastern horizon, Job would perform sacrifices for his children, just in case they had sinned in their hearts during their festivities. His devotion was absolute, his righteousness unquestioned. Then came the devastating cascade of losses. Imagine the scene as messenger after messenger arrived, each bearing worse news than the last. Raiders stealing livestock, fire from heaven consuming sheep and servants, a mighty wind destroying his children's house, killing all 10 of his offspring in one terrible moment. Finally, painful sores erupting across his body, leaving him sitting in ashes, scraping his skin with a piece of broken pottery. But the true test wasn't in these losses. It emerged in the aftermath through lengthy dialogues with 3 friends who came to comfort him. Eliphaz, drawing from personal experience, suggested Job must have sinned. Bildad, citing ancient wisdom, insisted God wouldn't punish the innocent. Zophar, the youngest, simply couldn't accept Job's protests of innocence. Their theological certainty in the face of Job's suffering represents every easy answer we've ever offered to explain away tragedy. The narrative reaches its climax not in Job's restoration, though that comes, but in God's response from the whirlwind. Instead of answering Job's questions about suffering, God poses his own questions about creation, about the foundations of the earth, about the mysteries of nature. It's a masterful literary device that shifts the entire framework of the discussion. Here's what makes this story eternally relevant. Job never receives an explanation for his suffering. Instead, he receives something far more valuable, a divine encounter that transforms his understanding of faith itself. His final statement isn't one of comprehension, but of transformed perspective. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This narrative speaks directly to our modern condition. In a world of increasing complexity and suffering, from pandemic losses to economic uncertainties, from personal tragedies to global crises, Job's story offers several profound insights. First, it legitimizes questioning and doubt within faith. Job's persistent questioning didn't diminish his faith, it deepened it. This offers a model for authentic spirituality that embraces both devotion and doubt. Second, it challenges the prosperity gospel prevalent in many modern religious circles. Job's story definitively breaks the simple equation between righteousness and reward, suffering and sin. Third, it provides a framework for maintaining integrity in the face of inexplicable suffering. Job's famous declaration, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him," wasn't blind faith but tested faith. The story's enduring power lies in its refusal to offer simple answers. Instead, it presents a model of faith that can withstand life's harshest realities while maintaining hope and integrity. It suggests that the purpose of suffering might not be what happens to us, but what happens in us. As we face our own trials in the modern world, Job's story reminds us that authentic faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about maintaining integrity and hope even in life's darkest moments. His journey from prosperity through suffering to transformation offers a timeless template for human resilience and spiritual growth. In the end, Job's story isn't just about suffering, it's about transformation. It's about emerging from life's greatest challenges not with answers, but with deeper wisdom. It's about learning that sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't in never doubting, but in continuing to seek God even in our doubts.